Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac. Family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vistic, Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo. But the people are here for Will Sammon from The Athletic down at the winter meetings right now. Will, thanks so much for joining us during a real quiet day for you, I'm sure.
Whether it's quiet, loud, guys, this remains the highlight of the winter meetings for me, is joining you guys.
It is tradition at this point, which we are proud to say. I don't think we've started a show with you like this, though. Let's get right into it because the people are freaking out. Edwin Diaz. How did we get here where Edwin Diaz is no longer a Met? Because all the information we have is that there's a $3 million difference. So what is there really to unpack right here, Will?
Well, I will say the freak out is warranted, right? I mean, we're talking about Edwin Diaz, who Mets fans know was the best free agent reliever available. And he is somebody that has been proven and tested in New York City and has gone through it, has come out on top. And for all intents and purposes, we thought that this was going to be somebody that the Mets would retain. And it was shocking to me. It really was, that to see him and to hear that he was going to the LA Dodgers, or really anybody other than the New York Mets. I was shocked when I heard that news, when that was relayed to me. Really, I was. As far as the difference goes, I think that's something that Edwin should probably speak on first and explain. I really would like to hear his point of view before going into it further. But I'll just say that I feel like Edwin Diaz wanted to be a New York Met. I feel like there was interest, genuine interest from the New York Mets side of it as well. But clearly he thought the best deal was from LA. And I feel like, wanted to, again, set that record for relievers. That was probably a big part of why he opted out in the first place. And sure, like maybe originally he wanted the 5 years or more than 3 or whatever it was. Of course, he's going to shoot for that kind of number and those kinds of numbers. I think it's surprising that he did not even get to 4 or 5 years and he still went elsewhere, because for me, in my reporting, it was always the sticking point was the years. And so for the offer to come out from the Mets side that the years were the same, that was surprising to me. It really was. So I'm eager to hear Edwin's side of it, for him to kind of say how everything went down, because I do believe that there was genuine interest from him to return to the Mets. And I also believe what I'm hearing from the Mets side is that they made a push for him as well. So I'm eager to see him unpack it. But it leaves the Mets in this situation where now Devin Williams is the de facto closer. And it's somebody that obviously the Mets targeted early and brought in. And I will also say that it's still early still for us here in the offseason. Like, things are happening, things are changing, but the Mets could still do a lot as far as the bullpen goes in other places, of course.
Specifically on that, obviously, with Diaz being gone, there's no replacing him. Devin Williams, as you said, is probably going to slide into the closer's job. But you mentioned that there's more to do with the bullpen. With Edwin Diaz signing for the amount of money that he did, does this open up the possibility that the Mets might pursue multiple high leverage relievers, and it's kind of a way of trying to replace Diaz in the aggregate of sorts?
I think that's a possibility for them. I haven't heard that explicitly put that way yet, Joe, but I really wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, because there are still guys out there, right? Whether it's a Robert Suarez, who performed well for the Padres, or Pete Fairbanks, there's Finnegan out there. These are guys who, yes, they're not Edwin Diaz. I'm not trying to say that by any means, but they're pretty solid back-end options that maybe you could slide and feel good about the 7th and the 8th to get to somebody like Devin Williams, who's a pretty good option for the closer role, actually. It's not going to make anybody happy. I understand that, who are big-time Mets fans who love Edwin Diaz and who can't wrap their heads around how this didn't end up with Edwin coming back to the Mets. But there are some avenues that they could still pursue. And there's guys available in the trade market as well, whether that's McGill from the Milwaukee Brewers or other players who are out there that have not been yet reported. I'm sure that they are testing those waters, the Mets, as far as seeking some help in those avenues as well. But the clearest path remains through free agency. Like, there are guys who are still available who you could conceivably add, who would make sense to add, because even with Devin Williams, there's still a lack of right-handed relievers in that bullpen. Like, you're going to have to add more, clearly. Like, they need to be in that market. So I would hope for their sake that they are. I would assume that they are. But there's also the possibility for trade help as well.
One of the next dominoes that every Met fan is looking towards, Will, is obviously Pete Alonso. There's been a lot of noise around Pete Alonso down at the winter meetings, especially with him attending the winter meetings. Do you think there's an expectation that his market will move a little quicker than last year, where it was very quiet, very delayed? And now with Kyle Schwarber off the board today, back to Philadelphia, does that present any kind of urgency for the Mets? Because that's a massive, massive hole in the middle of their lineup.
Well, it probably provides some urgency for other clubs as well, because
Right.
Kyle Schwarber received significant interest elsewhere. I would even say, from my reporting, a team like the Baltimore Orioles, for instance. I'm not so sure if a team like that maybe even existed for Pete Alonso last year around this time. They certainly do, I could say, from talking with league sources. Now they do this time around. So that, to me, is significant, right? That we could kind of say that there are teams out there that are definitely interested in Alonso. He does not have that qualifying offer attached to him. He's not coming off of a down season by his measures. It was actually a great season, even by his measures, last year. So I feel like things have changed for him in a good way for him. And the Orioles are in the mix, the Boston Red Sox, that's been reported as well elsewhere. So the Mets have some competition for Pete Alonso. And so I'm curious to see like what that means as far as their pursuit goes and how aggressive that they can get. Because the truth of the matter is that, going back from last year, if another team last year had a better offer on the table, Pete Alonso would not have been a New York Met, right? So I don't know. I'm eager to see how it all unfolds. To answer your question about timing, I could see it happen. I certainly don't expect it to stretch into February like it did last time, right? But as far as Schwarber being now off the board, I could definitely see things picking up a bit more for Alonso and for other position players, for that matter. Even guys, whether it's Kyle Tucker or Jorge Polanco, guys like that as well. I think we will see some movement on now that Schwarber's off the board, because there were just so many teams that were interested in him, even though the chalk, if you will, always pointed toward a reunion with the Phillies.
When it comes to the starting pitching trade market, what's the latest you're hearing on who actually is available? Because there's been a lot of kind of mixed reporting over, call it, the last 2-3 weeks. Is Tarek Skubal available? Is Joe Ryan available? Is Freddie Peralta available? And those are obviously just 3 names, so you could add more if you want. But what are you hearing as far as the availability of starting pitchers on the trade market that the Mets could go after?
Well, the 3 biggest names that I've heard that are conceivable and that I believe are seriously available: Mackenzie Gore, Edward Cabrera, so that's the Nationals, the Marlins, and then Freddie Peralta on the Milwaukee Brewers. Those are the 3 names that I consistently hear as available, as getting significant interest, real interest. As far as the Mets go with that, I'm not sure. I have heard, of course, that they're going to be in on guys like that. That should be no surprise. They should be in on that. I do question if the asking price gets really high, how comfortable is David Stearns and the front office toward matching that off? Because it's going to get up there. Because a lot of teams, right or wrong, they're looking at their free agency class and they're saying, maybe I can get a little bit better through the trade market. Maybe I don't have to spend. Maybe I could just use my farm system or use my resources to get somebody else. And so there's some competition out there. I mentioned the Orioles for Pete Alonso. They're in the mix for starting pitching as well. So there are teams like that match up well with other teams that are looking to maybe trade from a surplus, like maybe the Marlins, or trade for different reasons, such as the Brewers and the Nationals, perhaps. So those are the guys that are out there. I would assume that the Mets would be in on, if not all of them, 1 or 2 of those guys that I mentioned. And it's yet to be seen as far as just how aggressive they match up with the asking prices on those guys, because they're going to be high, understandably so.
Yeah, and if they have to pivot, Will, obviously there is pitching available through free agency. The Mets have reportedly met with Michael King on a virtual call. What do you believe their strategy could be there? Because all we consistently hear as Mets fans is, when it comes to starting free agent pitchers, most of them, obviously the international players don't factor into this, but they're usually 30 or on the wrong side of 30. And that kind of leads to an idea of maybe not a long-term investment. So is there a certain strategy there for the Mets? Is that a fallback option? How do you view that market?
Yeah, from my reporting, I don't feel like the Mets are all that enthused about going long on starting pitchers. And that, again, should be no surprise if you've been
Right.
following the Mets under David Stearns in this front office the last couple of years. The one guy that they went sort of crazy over was Yamamoto, who, no surprise, not a coincidence, was 25 years old at the time. So to your point, yes, that's a thing. And they're not alone with this. I mean, there are other teams that are viewing this similarly. So we'll see what the market entails for some of these starting pitchers. Maybe they get less years than the projections say they will, and maybe the Mets swoop in and they're opportunistic and they provide a good deal, maybe a high AAV, something like that could happen. But as far as the guy that you mentioned specifically there, Michael King, I could see that being a fit. And again, maybe that causes some pushback from Mets fans who are going to say, like, hey, he's not an ace or he's not the number one guy. I get that. I think that they should be more in the market for a standout number one. Again, easier said than done to acquire one of those guys. And the bottom line is, when it comes with the Mets and the pitching, I feel like any help is needed. When you look at their rotation and where things were, it could be a lot better. There's some question marks as far as like, hey, maybe you can get more out of Sean Manaea. Maybe that's viable. Maybe McLean takes an even bigger step forward. Maybe Jonah Tong takes a bigger step forward. Sproat. You could talk yourself into maybe this being an okay group. Clay Holmes, whoever else, but they need help. I think that's obvious, right? And so, like, if you're not going to get that number one guy who's going to slide into the number one or number two slot in your rotation, you better get a very, very dependable number three type of guy who can at least give you 30 starts, be of quality, maybe not the number one guy, but improves your rotation without a doubt. I think that has to be their number one priority right now.
We know David Stearns is valuing run prevention, which is just fancy lingo for pitching and defense. When it comes to their outfield pursuits, who are some names that you're hearing them linked to right now? And is one of the primary focuses to get a defensive minded outfielder, maybe specifically in center field? As we know, Stearns has always historically tried to be incredibly strong defensively up the middle.
I could see that. I could see them focusing more on defense. And by no means am I trying to dodge the question here, but the biggest thing I keep hearing with the Mets is pitching is a priority. So I think that that's kind of like where their focus may be right now. Not to say they can't do multiple things at once. That they probably are as I'm talking right now. But I feel like that's where most of my information is going is toward pitching, and that being names that I keep hearing, whether it's trade, free agency, whatever the case. But as far as the outfield help, yeah, I can see them going in a bunch of different directions. I think that they may have some interesting guys who have a little bit more upside, who are more mid-tier type free agents. I can see them maybe pulling off a trade in that space too, where, you know, we heard David Stearns just yesterday talk to the media and discuss the idea of more need for need based trades, like the one that they pulled off with Nimmo and Semien with the Texas Rangers. I could see maybe even a starting pitcher, whether it's David Peterson or whoever else. Maybe they trade him for outfield help or something like that. I could see that happening. I'm not reporting that that's a possibility or anything like that. That's more of a speculative guess on just maybe they match up in that way. And that's maybe where I could see them get maybe some left field help, or maybe an outfielder who could play all three positions, that type of versatility to bring into the mix, especially if you're not bringing in multiple outfielders. I'm not sure if they would, but if you're not, you better get somebody who could probably play all three spots.
Well, we saw you write today that David Peterson is a guy that in theory could be available. Maybe answered the phone on him. This is one for me. I have no idea what his value is. Have you heard anything on that? Such an interesting player, because obviously not far away from free agency, had a really strong first half last year before it kind of fell apart in the second half. And I read your article as well that maybe this fits another one of those player for player need type scenarios.
Yeah, precisely what I was getting at, Connor, was that like maybe he could be used because, like I was saying with the pitching market, like a lot of these teams are looking at trades and they're trying to see like, okay, are these guys maybe better fits for what we need as opposed to what's available in free agency? And David Peterson helps a lot of clubs, including the Mets, I will say. But
Right.
if you take him off there, you know, he's affordable. He's less than $10 million for a starting pitcher. So that's relatively affordable for a lot of clubs. He's somebody that's now, with the hip thing behind him and other stuff behind him, teams are looking at this guy as somebody who could post and maybe give us 30 starts kind of thing. And what I was saying before about, hey, like maybe he's not a number one or number two guy, you kind of know what you're getting from him, which for a lot of clubs, they like that. They like that comfort of, hey, we know that maybe he's not going to have that number one type of stuff, but we kind of know what we're getting from this guy every fifth day or so. So a lot of clubs like him. The asking price for the Mets, it's going to be high though. Like they're not just going to sell him off, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Like we're talking about a team that needs innings from guys, right? So like I think that they would do something like that if they could, accomplish a need, perhaps whether that's the outfield, that's part of a bigger trade, that's maybe a bullpen help, whatever. But they'd also have to kind of backfill that as well and add a starting pitcher, obviously. It kind of goes without saying, but just to make sure, that would probably be part of the equation there, right, is to add in somebody, especially if you're letting go of him, maybe even add two guys to your starting pitching mix if you're letting go of one, whether that's David Peterson or even somebody else.
Will, last one for you, and then we'll let you get back to the lobby. You got some scoops to get for us, so we don't want to hold you too much longer. We talked about kind of the uncertainty surrounding Pete Alonso's return, and obviously the Mets have already subtracted Brandon Nimmo. And while we understand that there is a desire for pitching and defense, who are some names that, like, the Mets also need to score more runs? They didn't score enough runs in 2025 as well, but who are some names that we should keep an eye on as options to help not just the run prevention, but the run production that also needs help?
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. Like we could talk about that. And like, honestly, with Pete Alonso, especially too, right? Like if you take away his offensive production, I don't care who you get defensively, it's not going to equate, at least in my opinion. I feel like statistically as well, I'd have a hard time believing that you could equate the absence of what he brings as far as value goes offensively, even if you're getting Sammon at second base and whoever else at first base, whether it's like somebody like Ryan O'Hearn or whoever else is available in free agency. I just don't think it's going to equate. Like it just, Pete Alonso is that elite of an offensive player. So again, not to sidestep that, but for me, it's Alonso. I just feel like they have to be more in on Alonso here. He has to be their priority, especially with Kyle Schwarber off the board. And then I think like you go from there. I feel like then you start, if you miss out on him and if he goes elsewhere, then I feel like you start seeing, okay, who else is out there, that you get a little bit more aggressive on the trade front. And maybe you pull in somebody from free agency who maybe even perhaps you weren't even expecting at the forefront of it just because of the way things have gone. Maybe you have to switch gears. So I'm not 100% sure on who that could be or where their possibilities lie offensively in that picture. But certainly they like you bring up a great point, Joe. Like the lineup cannot go without an addition here, especially with or without, I guess, Alonso, but definitely especially if you miss out on Alonso.
You could follow him at Will Sammon. If you're a Mets fan and you're not following Will, you're simply behind on all the news this offseason and every offseason. So highly recommend that. Will, we love doing this show every year. We thank you so much for cutting out some time because we know it's that week where you're running around. Keep up the great work, and thanks again.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks again, as always.
All right, that was Will Sammon from The Athletic, Joe, who we have on this show literally every year at the winter meetings. And it is like Will has not been on the Mets beat specifically that long. It's been a couple of years now. It is wild how much info he consistently has on top of this team. And I mean, Joe, where do we begin? This is a day, man, and it feels like it feels like it's far from over right now in Mets land. I guess we have to start just you and I because we haven't given our take on Edwin Diaz. I am going to give you the floor because full transparency, and I think 80% of our listeners know this, I have never met a more ride or die fan of Edwin Diaz than you. You stuck with him through the bad times. You were right about all of that. Unfortunately, he is now no longer a Met. So what did you make of today's news? And I don't know if you have a final goodbye to your favorite player, I feel like.
It's not goodbye. It's see you later, Connor. We can't do that.
Yeah,
but
Dodger blue. Yuck.
I mean, of all teams, right? Like, come on.
Yeah.
It had to be the Dodgers. And when I saw that he signed with the Dodgers, first off, I was angry that Edwin Diaz was leaving for the Dodgers.
Of course.
And then I was surprised when it came about that Edwin Diaz signed a 3-year deal with the Dodgers. If you told me the Dodgers did the Dodgers thing and stepped out and offered 5 years and $120 million and deferred some money, but just went so far above and beyond, I'd be annoyed, but I'd be like, it is what it is. I wouldn't have wanted to give 5 years to Edwin Diaz if I were the Mets. With that said, hey, when you play games in negotiation, Connor, and that's when you're trying to squeeze and thread the needle of just value, you have a chance to lose, and you're going to lose often, especially when dealing with these top end players. And the quote, I bring it up on occasion, and it's almost 9 years ago to the day. Andrew Friedman, who now signed Edwin Diaz, said, if you are rational about every free agent, you will finish third on every free agent. So the Mets need to find a balance here where, yes, you don't want them to just go give 5 years to Diaz, give 7 to Alonso, give 6 to Valdez, and do all these irrational things. But there has to be, and we said it at the outset of this offseason, David Stearns needs to step outside of his comfort zone. And the operation in which this Edwin Diaz situation played out was David Stearns sitting exclusively in his comfort zone of, I'm not going past 3 years, not doing a bidding war of sorts. And something to consider too, these players, they have feelings too. Like in these negotiations, it's easy for you and I to sit here, Connor, and be like, he's not worth this, or he's not worth that, or hold out until you could get him at your dollar value. This is speculation. Maybe Edwin Diaz didn't appreciate that the Mets weren't showing him proper appreciation and said, well, Dodgers really like me. They win all the time, so I'm going to jump over there.
Yeah, it's a tough one where there's things we don't know, and I think you and I are always careful with that. And Will, who knows more than anyone right now about the Mets, besides the Mets themselves, even he said that's something that I'd rather let Edwin Diaz speak to, which I think is the really pragmatic, intelligent approach. So you just have to go with what you do know right now, Joe. What we do know is it feels like the Mets weren't, like you said, aggressive out of the gate here. They played the strategy of, because this is, you can't argue back with this, anyone, because we saw the Mets already do a negotiation with Edwin Diaz a couple of years ago. They didn't want him to even see what was out there. They had him sign an extension before free agency even began. The Mets could have done that again this year, unless we come to find out that no matter what Edwin Diaz was going to the market. I don't buy that. I think Edwin Diaz, since we've seen it before, it was open to negotiating with the Mets before free agency began. The Mets in this era, because we saw them do it with Pete Alonso last year, are not afraid of, no matter your status with the fan base, no matter what you've done on the field, they are this Mets era. And I think we praise David Stearns when he makes good moves. We call him out when we're kind of questioning the strategy right now. Well, under Stearns, they're not afraid of guys going to market and seeing what they can get and coming back to the team. And they're doing it right now with Pete Alonso again, by the way. Pete Alonso's at the winter meetings, meeting with the Red Sox, meeting with the Orioles. This whole Diaz scenario can happen all over again in the next 24 to 48 hours or whatever it may be. And when you do that, like you said, Joe, there's times where you're going to land on the exact value of the player where you didn't overpay, because the player wanted to be back and your offer wasn't going to be topped. But there's times where you look like this, and that's really bad right now. And I'm talking about the moment, because in a month from now, all the money they spend or trades they make, the Mets roster could look great. And I'm not going to sit here and say that the season's over because Edwin Diaz went to the Dodgers. Like that's not what we do. You and I are big picture guys. The baseball offseason is not 24 hours long. But considering they offered him 3 years, $66 million, considering what he means to the team, and I would think the Cohen family, the Mets wanted Edwin Diaz back, right? They didn't go into it saying, we got Devin Williams, we're good. They offered the man 3 years, $66 million. And at some point, whether it was a miscommunication, whether Diaz felt disrespected, whether Diaz just wanted to go to the Dodgers, and maybe that's the case. And if that's the case, then if you're a Met fan and you're mad, like I'm not going to blame you at all. That's extremely frustrating, because that would be him getting a great deal, but also chasing a championship with the team that the Mets are trying to take down. So there's a lot to unpack here, and some of it we can't because of the unknowns. But I think what matters as a fan of this team, after you get over the emotional feeling of a fan favorite being gone, an electrifying player, one of the positives of the 2025 Mets, where there weren't a lot of positive things about the Mets last year, but Edwin Diaz was nearly at the damn top of the list. Is that now you gotta figure this out. Like, you gotta buckle up and be like, okay, well, that's a lot of money that we need to invest in this team elsewhere. I love that you ended that interview with Will Joe saying we could do run prevention this and super bullpen that. We need to score some damn runs too. This lineup doesn't look great right now without Pete Alonso in it. So I think it is one of those where, as a Met fan, I think you have the right to be very annoyed how this went down, because something doesn't add up here. And I think it's a bad look. But I also think, unless truly Diaz comes out and I don't think he's going to do this, I'll be surprised. But I don't think he's going to come out and say, I just wanted to be with the Dodgers. Thank you for the Mets for all the great times. You know, I think there's going to be a game of telephone here. But now, Joe, it doesn't matter. It's spilled milk at this point. The Mets need to improve this roster, and they need to improve it drastically, and they need to operate with some damn urgency.
Connor, urgency is the exact word that I would use here, what the Mets need to do. Because, look, 2025 just didn't work out. The team came in with sky-high expectations. They won 83 games, missed the playoffs. Everyone knows the story. When you have that type of failure of a season, and that's what it was. It was a straight-up failure of a season.
Yeah.
The 2026 team needs to be better than the 2025 team. And now Brandon Nimmo is out the door. And you swapped him for Marcus Semien. You could talk me into that one making sense. You get better defense at second base. You open up outfield for a different opportunity there, and you kind of shed a Brandon Nimmo contract. But the Diaz part of things, I said it on the show last 3 weeks. When you have the best at something, if you want to be the Dodgers, if you want to be the class of baseball, when you have the best, which Edwin Diaz is, you make sure you keep the best. And unfortunately, as you said, we are where we are. Edwin Diaz is no longer a Met. He is a Los Angeles Dodger. That adds an additional layer on top of the need to significantly improve the roster, because if you want to make a deep playoff run, guess who you're going to run into at some point? The Dodgers. And Edwin Diaz is there now. So, look, Devin Williams is right now the Mets closer. And one thing I would want to caution, so now this is going to be big picture Joe coming into the stage a little bit. I don't want people to forget how good Devin Williams was on a 4-year run prior to the uneven 2024 he had. 2-time reliever of the year, a elite closer in baseball. If he was a free agent last offseason, he would have gotten the 5 years, $100 million.
He would have set the new record by $1 million or whatever it would have been. Call it 100,000. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no question. So I think the Mets, in having Devin Williams, got the second best closer option that they could get on the market. That's not an excuse to not have the first best and the second best when you are the Steve Cohen Mets.
Right.
But Devin Williams can close games. I really believe that. Everything under the hood suggests that he was really not much different of a pitcher in 2024 than he was for those previous years. But now, if you want to do the bullpen, you want to make that big bullpen, you got to do multiple things. I think you have to try to sign a Robert Suarez, or you have to try to sign a Pete Fairbanks. I think you try to trade for a Trevor McGill, who was a seriously good closer for the Brewers, and try to replace Diaz with multiple leverage arms instead of having the best. But then it all circles back to the offense and Pete Alonso. What is going to happen there? And if the Mets are going to hold firm at 3 years on Pete Alonso, this is not me being an insider. This is me just talking. I think Pete Alonso's not going to be a Met in 2026 if they're holding firm on 3 years.
He'll play in the American League East. I guarantee it.
Yeah. And guess what? Maybe he'll take a 3-year deal from an American League team like the Orioles or the Red Sox. The Mets need to, I think, be more aggressive with Alonso. I don't think this means you necessarily need to go to 5 or 6 years. I would call Pete Alonso and say, I'm willing to do 4 years at good money. We know you'll split a little time at DH, but we also want you to play some first base because I did a little diving onto his Baseball Savant page, and I sent this to you in text. Defensively, I didn't realize until a couple days ago that they break down outs above average based on directional. So Pete Alonso, as a lot of people could probably say watching him, very poor defender going to his right. But going to his left and going back, Pete Alonso's an above average defensive first baseman by outs above average. If you have a guy like Marcus Semien at second base with the plus range that he has, and you could convince Pete to be a little less aggressive going to his right, I think he would be fine at first base, at least for a couple more years. And Kyle Schwarber is 2 years older than him, a pure designated hitter with zero defensive value. He got 5 years. So I need to understand why Kyle Schwarber could get 5 years and 2 years younger Pete Alonso with at least some semblance of defensive value can't get more than 3. We need to find a middle ground here. And I think the Mets really, if they didn't think Pete Alonso was a truly important cog to their team and to this offseason plan, I think their plans really need to start shifting soon.
Yeah, I think that, number one, I'm with you on this. There has to be, well, first off, I'll say this. I wonder, and I don't think it would change too much from Stern's point of view, but I do wonder if it changes from ownership point of view. You let a Met, I know they traded for him, but Edwin Diaz at that point was an established New York Met, right? The entrance, Edwin Diaz got something most baseball players struggle to do, and that's national fame because of his entrance. It's hard for a lot of major leaguers this day with the state of baseball to have people that don't watch baseball know who you are, or everybody knew about Timmy Trumpet and Edwin Diaz and the entrance. And so that, number one, and I'm not saying that's that's what makes it unfathomable to let him go, but these things start to matter when you build the culture and who you are and what the stadium experience is and what the young fan gravitates to right now. What you just said, Joe, with Pete Alonso taking a 3-year deal from another team, it would feel like a repeat of what we just lived today, where we're sitting here and going, we couldn't go to 4. The guy's not 40 years old, right? At some point, there's a we've gone too far line, because I'll be the first person to be like, Pete has had big aspirations that were unrealistic at times for what his market would be as a right-handed first baseman now in his 30s. But we also need to kind of sit here and be like, not only what Pete Alonso has done for the Mets org, the fact that their DH spot is open, the fact that you got a guy in Juan Soto that lives on base. You had a guy in Pete Alonso that all he does is knock in runs. Maybe you should keep that guy, barring a team doing something stupid. If we wake up tomorrow and the Red Sox gave Pete Alonso a 6-year deal for $275 million, I'd sit here and be like, you know what? I don't love it, but I get it. I absolutely get it. That's not the ballpark we're playing in right now, Joe. It feels like, I think 125 would get it done. Am I nuts?
Yeah. No, I honestly think if the Mets went to Pete Alonso and offered him 4 years and 120 or $125 million, he's probably a Met by the end of the week. I really think this is it's just a weird thing that I really need to figure out why the market is this way and why it's so, I guess, against Pete Alonso in a way, right? And when you look at this Mets offense, Connor, even if the Mets decided, hey, we're going to go that extra year and we're going to get Pete Alonso, I still don't think they necessarily have enough offense.
They don't, Joe. It's not, you don't think, you know it because you just lived it.
Yeah, it's not enough. And now you're going to let him go and look at the market of what is available. In free agency, could the Mets pivot to Kyle Tucker? Sure. But Kyle Tucker is more of your well-rounded, very good baseball player rather than that mega thumper that I think the Mets need. Cody Bellinger, I don't think he's all that different than Brandon Nimmo, so I'm not in a rush. Like a better defensive player, but just like general profile.
Now,
I don't think it's crazy different than Nimmo. So you're shedding one outfield contract to give another 5 or 6 year deal to a different guy that you're going to probably play in left field. It doesn't make sense to me. And on the trade market, who's out there? I have no idea. So yeah, the pressure is up, and the pressure is on David Stearns because this, as I said, this is a team that needs to take a significant step forward in 2026. And so far, it is December 9th. There's a whole lot of offseason to go. For all we know, something will break in the next 5 minutes. That would be great since we're live.
That'd be nice.
Or something will break 10 minutes after we're done, which is much more likely. And so there's a lot of things still to be done. And you said it a little bit ago. We might do a Mets pod in 6 weeks and be like, you know what? Mets roster turned out pretty dang good. I think this team has a shot. But the pressure is on because through December 9th, the Mets did not become a better baseball team by swapping Brandon Nimmo for Marcus Semien. And the Mets did not become a better baseball team by, unfortunately, swapping Edwin Diaz for Devin Williams.
That's exactly right. You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. We are taking mailbag questions in the chat. Let's get to 2 of those before we go down on the farm. Then we'll get back to the mailbag as well. This one from Measy BX on YouTube. How about signing Bo Bichette to play first if Alonso isn't re-signed? Joe, to me, just not enough power. Not enough power to be your first baseman.
I mean, I don't think Bo. I still think Bo is an infielder. I think he's
second base.
He's gonna be fine at second base. I don't think he's a first base fit. If you want to talk first base fits, if Pete Alonso does not resign, it is: do they take a dive at Munetaka Murakami? Do they look at Kazuma Okamoto, from both players from Japan? Ryan O'Hearn is a guy that hits righties really well and can handle defensively at first. But the list from there, like Eugenio Suarez is a guy that has dabbled a tiny bit at first base, but he's not really much of a defensive value as a player. And I kind of think he's more of a DH. I don't think Bo Bichette is at the point in his career where he's a first baseman. Maybe down the road, but right now I think Bo is probably signing a massive 7-year type of deal, and he's going to play second base. And I'm going to circle back to this with most of these questions if they're along these lines. Why am I signing Bo Bichette for 7 years when I could just sign Pete Alonso for 4 and resolve this issue?
Yeah, you know how many 30 home run seasons Bo Bichette has had? None. Pete Alonso,
I was gonna say, as many as us.
Every non-COVID season, he's hit 34 plus. So, I mean, we're just starting to completely lose the plot at some point. Once again, right? Like, if the combo was the Mets don't want to give Pete Alonso 7 years, it's a bad investment. They'll have too many deals with bad back ends. And they just got out of one and Brandon Nimmo. That was the whole point of moving on from him. But that's not the combo anymore because the league has told Pete Alonso multiple times that they don't think he's a player that is worthy of a 6 or 7 year deal. I don't think he's getting 5. Could that be what it takes for a team to pry him away? We'll see. Another one from YouTube, Jay Bennett, 1090. Is there any smoke to Skubal being traded? This is one, Joe, where it feels like we wake up every day and we hear they don't want to move him. And then, they might have to because they can't get close on the money and he's going to get to free agency. So, I mean, my take, Joe, from afar is I think there's going to come a crunch time where they have to move him. But I don't think the problem is it might not even make sense for a team to trade for him if he's just going to free agency no matter what.
My eye actually is on what else does Detroit do? Like they're showing interest in a guy like Pete Fairbanks. They're supposedly showing interest in guys like Bo Bichette and Alex Bregman. If the Tigers start adding substantial pieces to their roster, that to me tells me that they're going to try to win in 2026 and they'll deal with the Tarek Skubal free agency when free agency comes around. But if we're looking up a week or two from now and the Tigers have done nothing, then maybe that starts to percolate a little bit that, okay, trading Skubal does make sense because the Tigers don't see themselves as legitimate World Series contenders. And the trade that they probably can get for Skubal is going to be so much value, Connor, that it might be hard to turn down. And it's a really tough job that Scott Harris, the general manager or president of baseball operations with the Tigers, has to figure that out, because trading Skubal is no different than like the Mets trading Pete Alonso or the Mets trading one of their franchise type of players. So it's not a simple decision. But I wouldn't be shocked whatsoever if Skubal is dealt this winter. But I kind of, like you, go back and forth almost day to day on it.
Right. It's just one of those situations where you're sitting there and going, okay, I have to give up what for him? And then I don't even get the guarantee that he's on the team beyond this year. And yeah, you could sit here and go, Steve Cohen will spend whatever he needs to spend, but this is an expensive one. And I think it's very complicated for all parties involved. Let's take a quick break from the mailbag. I promise we're going to get right back to it and talk about this team, but we got to go down on the farm real quick. Because Joe, one of your favorite events of the baseball offseason, the MLB draft lottery, and the Mets will be picking where?
Number 27 overall, Connor. As if this day couldn't have got any worse for me.
It's the real final Diaz kick in the pants.
Departs for the Dodgers, and I put on the draft lottery at 5:30. I'm kind of in a nasty mood, and I'm like, let's just see what happens here. And the Mets don't end up in the top 6, which, just for clarity for folks, if the Mets did not end up in the top 6 picks of the draft lottery, their first pick drops 10 spots due to how much they spent over the luxury tax last season. And I'm like, all right, well, Mets had a very low chance to be in the top 6 as it was, so whatever. It's just another thing that didn't work out. And then JJ Cooper from Baseball America, who's heavily involved into draft and things like that, posted that when the lottery was actually occurring, the physical ping pong balls, there was one spot left in the lottery for a top 6, and the only team in baseball that had 2 options to get the 6th pick, the only team left was the Mets. They had, I think it was ball 10 and 13. If either of those numbers are called, the Mets pick 6th. What number gets called? 12. So the
that
Mets,
kind of day, huh?
Yeah. That kind of day, no draft luck lottery, but they will pick number 27 overall. And if you want to go back, the last time that the Mets picked number 27 overall was in 1983. They selected right-handed pitcher Calvin Schiraldi from the University of Texas. Apparently well known for blowing games in 1986. Connor, you want to talk about your vast knowledge of Calvin Schiraldi for us?
My Mets history, and I'm sure there's plenty of our listeners that watched this live. I was not on the earth then, but Calvin Schiraldi, notorious for blowing the final 2 games of the 1980. Now, I mean, some of it was not obviously his fault. Some of it was. He also, I believe, closed the door on game 1. I believe he got the save game 1. Calvin Schiraldi, very much one of the main characters of the 1986 World Series, former first-round Mets pick, and then obviously a notable figure in the 1986 World Series against the Mets, playing for the Red Sox. So what we know here is, Joe, that you hinted at in the chat, this draft pick will play some kind of role in the next World Series win for the Mets, but maybe against the Mets, maybe for the Mets. Let's get back to the mailbag. Kevin Lynch on Twitter. First question, is Steve Cohen running a large market or a small market team? Second question, does David Stearns think he is the smartest man in baseball? Third question, considering Stearns has never won anything, is he the right man for this job? I'll hang up and listen. Well, to the first question, and I truly believe this part, I know we're not used to this because of previous off seasons. I don't think Steve Cohen is running this baseball team in terms of the roster right now. We know Steve Cohen was involved in signing Verlander and Soto, but we just watched Edwin Diaz, who had a very close relationship with the Cohen family, leave for the Dodgers today in a very convoluted way. I think that tells you everything of Steve Cohen's current status in this offseason. He hired David Stearns to do a job. Steve Cohen has maybe not managed a ton of people in the baseball world before, but he managed a lot of people in the finance world before this. He hires people to do a job. So if you are looking to direct your anger right now, or eventually your praise, Joe, and maybe I'm being naive, you can call me out if I am, I think this is David Stearns' offseason right now.
I do too, Connor. I think this is David Stearns' team that he is building, and it's funny that there's a lot of people, and I honestly appreciate this question from Kevin, because I think he's speaking for the fans that are very frustrated right now,
and they should be.
At 100%, I am. You are.
I am. I'm pissed today.
Yeah. yeah, we're not here to sugarcoat that. But just to answer that first question, is Steve Cohen running a large market or small market team? All I need you to do is go ahead and look at the Mets payroll numbers since Steve Cohen bought the roster. I need you to go back 1 year and 2 days ago and look up what happened with the Mets. It was a $765 million contract to Juan Soto. I think Steve Cohen is incredibly invested in this team's success. And it is at the point now that this is David Stearns' show, and he has to decide what he thinks is best for the Mets. And for better or worse, that is how I think it's going to go. And frankly, as a fan, I don't really want my owner be like just stepping over the GM. And I know there's a lot of like, Steve Cohen has to get Alonso done. Steve Cohen has to get Diaz done. Or if there's something that fans think the Mets should do, their answer is, well, if David Stearns doesn't want to do it, then Steve Cohen needs to. That's really not the way an organization should operate. But David Stearns, this is the pressure spot that he's in. You signed up to take this job in New York. You're getting paid handsomely to do so. You're going to build this team, and the results are going to, fall on his shoulders. And that's part of the gig of being a president of baseball operations, especially in a market like New York City, especially with a payroll that when the dust settles here in a month, Connor, the Mets are going to have a top 2 payroll in baseball. So that's just where it's going to be more likely than not. And that's the investment that I think Cohen is willing to make and has proven year over year that he's going to make.
We're going to learn if Stearns is the right man for this job. I am still in the camp of, can we let him try to earn that trust right now? You could be as mad as you want about last year, but that doesn't wash away the year before that. I think you need to be careful constantly living in the moment. And if you have a definitive take after this year, then so be it. That's 3 years, and you've seen a couple off seasons, and today was not a good day for David Stearns. Like, I'm not logging on this podcast and explaining away what happened with Edwin Diaz. Even if Diaz ultimately comes out and says, I always wanted to be with the Dodgers, once again, like, the Mets let Edwin Diaz try free agency, and anything happens, all bets are off after that. So, we're gonna learn if David Stearns is the right man for this job. But I like your reminder, Joe. I have been a Mets fan almost my entire life. Basically, I remember watching this team when I was very, very young and being addicted to being a Mets fan. I don't take Steve Cohen owning this team for granted a single hour of my fandom right now, because I remember what it was like before Steve Cohen owned the team. So you can ask a lot of questions, Kevin, and I get it. We can wonder, does David Stearns think he's the smartest man in baseball? Is he the right man for this job? Like, I don't know. But I know Steve Cohen is running a large market team. I don't think there is any arguing that. It's just, if you don't like how he is running it, that's a different equation. But the payroll is the payroll. The stadium experience is the stadium experience. And I think Steve Cohen truly cares about this fan base. If it doesn't always result to winning, well, that's the sport, and it's not easy to win in the sport. But I think his actions, notably from his wallet, that are not just spend on players, but he spends on player development, the minor league system, Citi Field, everything that comes with that, I think speaks for itself. All right, we got another one on YouTube from Brandon L19. Hey, Connor and Joe, who are the top 3 players currently available that would help your guys' view of the offseason if they were all to become Mets? Could be a trade or free agent. I guess we could ping pong these back and forth, Joe, so we don't say the same guys, but I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, well, Brandon, appreciate you chiming in.
With some positivity.
They need to get, yeah. Well, look, there is the step forward, and you made a lot of great points, and a lot of people I understand, but now it's about how do we make this team go? And
right.
for me, it really does start with getting a top of the rotation type of starter, and that doesn't necessarily mean a quote unquote ace, because I firmly believe the only quote unquote ace that could be available is Tarek Skubal. I'm going to operate on the thought that he may stay in Detroit. There's a lot of expectation that Freddie Peralta is available. I am going to be aggressive and try to bring Freddie Peralta in and pair him at the top of the rotation with Nolan McLean, and then you obviously have guys like Clay Holmes and Sean Manaea and others behind him. But Peralta, I think, is my top priority in the rotation. Next, signing Pete Alonso. We just talked about it.
We're both going to have that one. There's no way around it.
Yeah. So we're signing
one of the
Pete
best bats on the market right now.
He might be just genuinely the best bat on the market right now. And so Alonso, I think he's got to be back. And then third, I'm going to dip into that bullpen market, and I'm going to either A, sign Robert Suarez, who is a very accomplished closer, and he and Devin Williams could fight it out, or they could just be a couple high leverage guys and you don't establish a pure closer. Or I love what Will brought up and what has been reported, Trevor McGill. So I'm cheating a little bit by naming 4, but basically what I'm saying is front end starter, Pete Alonso, high end reliever.
Yeah, it's hard to differ from that. I mean, I can give you different names. I guess since I align with you on so much of that, I saw some noise on Twitter because AJ Preller, wouldn't necessarily call anyone untouchable on the Padres. I'm at least interested in Fernando Tatis, Joe.
Connor, you want fans to get back on the saddle and get some excitement. Oh,
yes,
boy.
That's the question.
Imagine a Martino tweet or a Jeff Passanbaum that says Mets get Fernando Tatis Jr. from the Padres. I think you'd see at least some level of tune changing in the Mets fan base, but continue.
But that's a move that has juice, man. It's one that, once again, his name, listening to a lot of the local chatter here on the radio, he's more discussed with the Yankees because the Yankees have a potential outfield hole unless they bring back Bellinger. The Yankees are mentioned with Kyle Tucker, and then they're constantly mentioned with Tatis. But you know who else has an outfield hole right now? Is the New York Mets. They do right now. And they're a team that will gladly take on that long-term money that per year is not anything crazy. And you want to bring in some energy to this roster. You want to shake up the clubhouse and the edge of the team, the mindset of the team. That's a move that would definitely bring some excitement. But once again, a guy that we don't know if he'll be moved, and we don't know if he'll be moved within the National League. But man, that would be something, that one. All right, let's get back to our Twitter mailbag here from Doc, Michael1Doc on Twitter. Please address the possibility that Diaz may not have wanted to come back. This is the last time we'll get through this one more time. Will said he wants to hear from Diaz. We kind of echo that. But, Joe, it's one of those where we're going to find out eventually because – and it's also weird for Diaz because I thought Freddie Freeman, who much different history when he left the Braves than Diaz, as good as Diaz has been here. It felt like Freddie Freeman went too far where it started to bother the Dodger fan, rightfully so. He just, you can't keep missing your ex where I don't know. Diaz needs to be a little careful here with saying, well, I wanted to come back and they stopped talking to me. Because then if you're a Dodger fan and the Dodgers, you're like, what? So
yeah.
I don't know how we'll ultimately find out what really went down here, though. But the bottom line is, the Mets made their mistakes here, but I also find it hard to believe the Mets stopped at a 3-year deal worth $23 million. They're less than that. 22 was the Mets. Call me just whatever you want, drinking the Kool-Aid, whatever it is. Something doesn't make sense here. As small market minded as people like to accuse David Stearns of being, it just doesn't add up. At some point, Diaz had to want to say, okay, even if he really wanted to be back with the Mets, it came down to $3 million. $3 million?
$3 million over 3 years. Like that, I don't know. Something isn't right here. I just don't know what it is. And as you said,
and we're being careful.
I suspect Diaz at his press conference with the Dodgers is just going to say how great the Dodgers are. He's wanted to win a World Series, and they give him the best opportunity to do so because all they do is win no matter what, essentially, which
if he says that, then the Met fan's going to be pissed, and he's going to be called Kevin Durant by the fan base, which is already happening. And I don't think he'll be received very warmly at Citi Field, and that's the game you play. And that may or may not be fair or unfair to Edwin Diaz, because maybe he did want to come back and there's something we don't know. But if you go and say, I want to be here because it's my best route to winning a championship, which is his right, good for you. I get it, man. You're a professional athlete. You only got so many cracks at this thing. But the Met fan also has the right to be pissed. I'll say that as well.
No doubt about it. And we're going to find out, like you said, eventually, one way or another. I could see Will Sammon, our guest today, does a great job on those deep dive behind the scenes things. So there might be a day, February 19th, that there's just all of a sudden article from The Athletic and Will Sammon breaking down everything that really happened behind the scenes with Edwin Diaz. So we don't know. We'll see what he says. But now it genuinely is, and as tough as this is for me personally to say, it's time to move on and figure out what's next.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac. The all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vistic Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. All right, Joe, give me a little closing thoughts here before we sign off. The Mets got to – I'm not pressing the, do something button, but if Pete Alonso signs with a non-Mets team before the winter meetings end, and the Mets are just flying home, looking much worse than they came into the week being, it's going to get ugly around here.
I don't want to think about that, Connor.
I think something positive will happen for this team. I do.
My closing thoughts are there are good things still to come. I know this is a rough day for Mets fans. It's rough for us. It's rough for the Mets in general, losing Edwin Diaz. But there are ways out of this. There are ways for the Mets to put together a team that can contend to make a deep run in the playoffs in 2026. Even without Edwin Diaz, it's going to take a lot of work. And David Stearns has also been very open that there's a lot of work left to be done. And he has referenced the word trades in multiple. He has referenced free agency. So I think there's going to be emergency Mets Pod episodes where Connor and I are hopping on to break down the Mets traded for this or the Mets signed this. And we're going to take it a move at a time. And we're going to circle back because spring training is what? Pitchers and catchers are probably 8 weeks away, give or take. So it's all going to come up on us here really quickly. And he has work to do. And Connor, a free agent signing right at the buzzer before we log off from the Mets Pod. The Pirates and former Mets left-hander Gregory Soto are in agreement on a 1-year, $7.75 million deal. So
that's good money for Gregory Soto.
Good for Gregory Soto, but I did say we would get something during the Mets Pod. I was hoping it was the Mets did something, but it was Mets related one way or another.
There it is. That's what you got for the live show. The big Gregory Soto, good Gregory Soto money if you can get it. All right, everybody.
Where were you when? Were you when Gregory Soto
I was
signed
seated,
with the Pirates?
that's for sure. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can leave us a review with a question like you heard today. We use them for the mailbag. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel. Make sure you're a subscriber over there as well. That's it for now from Joe and I, but I'm sure we'll talk to everybody real soon.